Excellent. All right, why don't we go ahead and go live and call the meeting to order?
I just pulled OIS. Give me 1 second, Chairman.
Okay, no worries.
You are live.
All right. Okay, welcome everyone to the Health and Social Services Subcommittee briefing on TCA and SNAP benefits, especially as they relate to the pandemic and the need of families during this very, very difficult time. We have the Department of Human Services with us, as well as a number of advocates. The format that's going to go, I believe we're only letting in folks who are actually going to be testifying, and then the rest of the hearing can be viewed on YouTube, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, okay, I'm getting nodded heads. Okay, so if you want to watch the hearing, it's also being recorded and you can go view that at any time. We are going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start with a briefing from the Department of Legislative Services and our analyst, Tanya Zimmerman. We're going to move to the Department of Human Services, and then we are going to hear from advocates. We're also going to take questions after each group presents from the legislators. And I see Delegate Branch is joining us. Welcome, Delegate Branch. Thank you. And then what I would also ask is for the department to stick around. I'm hoping that you would, for the presentation of the advocates and the questions for the advocates, as well as there might be some overlapping questions. You may feel free to ask to answer something that may be brought up at that time through questioning. So we're going to go ahead and begin. I will acknowledge Tanya Zimmerman, our policy analyst, and take it away, Tanya.
Thank you. Right. You can skip to the next slide. Actually, to the next slide. This is a brief summary of some of the major flexibilities that have been provided during the period of the COVID. I would note that the yellow highlighted areas are areas where we expect continued flexibility, but we do not have official word on those flexibilities as of yet. One of the primary flexibilities has been the emergency allotments, under which the recipients get the maximum allotment for their household size, regardless of what they would otherwise qualify for. That's expected to be available through the end of the state of emergency, but it's being provided on a month-to-month basis at this point, so we only have information through December. The certification extension of 6 months, it ran initially through the month of June, and then there was a gap in the authorization. The continuing resolution that was passed earlier in the federal fiscal year granted some additional flexibilities to states, and the state is again issuing a extension on recertifications, which began in October and is expected to continue through March. The continuing resolution also allowed them to waive recertifications, and that they are doing that through June. The PEBT benefits, the highlighted areas are the months that the benefits cover, not when they were issued. There was a lag as states learned how to process that new benefit. So it covered the issued benefits for the end of last school year and in the month of September. The first state was just approved for the extension just last week. You can go to the next slide. So this chart here shows information on the applications. The pre-pandemic period is a pretty typical kind of non-recessionary period. And then there was an incredible spike in applications in April. The red line is TCA, the blue line is on SNAP. They're on different scales because the SNAP applications are so much higher. But there were over 149,000 applications for SNAP in the month of April. and over 17,000 applications for TCA. These were both record levels of applications. They came down fairly quickly to more typical levels in the subsequent months, but started to spike again in October. This is potentially due to people trying to come back on after recertification periods. You can go to the next slide. So this slide shows the number of recipients in the programs, the 3 primary programs. Back to 2005, the gray marked areas are the recession. The first gray marked area is the Great Recession, and then the second is the current recession. And you can see on the slide that in the Great Recession, which is more typical of a recession, the caseloads actually peaked well after the recession was over. The current situation, the caseloads spiked very dramatically compared to their pre-pandemic levels, which had January or February lows prior to the pandemic. They peaked in June for TCA and TDAP, and July for SNAP. They started to decline after that, likely due to the recertification beginning again. The economy also improved as the unemployment rate came down. I would note that I do not have SNAP recipient data for the month of November. We do have case data, which indicated that the SNAP cases increased in November by just under 34,000. So I would expect to see recipients will increase. It's not, however, shown on the chart. The TCA numbers came down again in November. They remain considerably elevated to pre-pandemic levels. The TDAP caseloads continue to decline, and they have declined well below the pre-pandemic levels, well below prior lows. There were just over 8,200 recipients of this. The prior low and data we had was over 10,000. So this is considerably lower than what we would have expected to see when they came down from the recertification period. You can go to the next slide. This is just a brief summary. The University of Maryland School of Social Work's Family Welfare Research and Training Group annually submits to the General Assembly the Life After Welfare Report, which provides information on those who leave TCA. This year's report included a brief snapshot of some of the impacts of the pandemic, which that report would not normally cover for this year because the most recent report was for the 2019 year. But they did include a little bit of information, and there were a couple of interesting points to note. So most of the recipients in the early months of the pandemic had prior experience with public benefits. However, if you look at the second kind of sub-bullet on the second bullet, only 36% of the April to June recipients had TCA receipt in the last 60 months, so they were relatively independent of TCA. However, 75% had received SNAP in the prior year. So these were people who no longer had qualified for TCA and had generally been away from TCA for some period of time, but they were not people who were well off. They were already generally connected to the public benefit system. You can turn to the next slide. This map shows by county the increase in the TCA recipients. So this is not the number of TCA recipients by jurisdiction, but the increase in recipients from February to October. This is past the peak, so this is after it started to come down. But the 2 counties with the largest increase were Prince George's County, which was over 150% higher than February, and Anne Arundel County, which is over 140% higher than it was in the February kind of pre-pandemic period. The highest number of TCA recipients continued to be in Baltimore City, as it has typically been. You can go to the next slide. This shows something similar, but for SNAP recipient increases. Again, the two jurisdictions experiencing the largest increases were Anne Arundel County, which was an increase of about 54%, and Prince George's County, which was about 42% increase. Baltimore City continues to have the highest number of recipients, as it has typically had. One thing to note is that during the pandemic era increases, Prince George's County recipients surpassed Baltimore County recipients as the second highest number of recipients. Prince George's County had just under 110,000 recipients in October, and Baltimore County had about 106,000. You can go to the next slide. This data is SNAP case closure by week. The spikes that you see would be the periods where the recertifications kind of hit the data. You can see that SNAP closures by week have been typically very low, except for those weeks. In those weeks with the spikes, more than 90% of the closures were due to failure to reapply, which indicates some type of recertification issue. In most other weeks, the top case closure reason is gross income over limit, but it's not as dominant of a reason. You can go to the next slide. So this is case closures for TCA by reason. So again, these are shares of TCA closures, not the number of case closures. This is broken down into a number of different periods. The red bars are the pre-pandemic period of fiscal 2020 and represent kind of a more typical closure reasons. The lighter blue bars are the March to June period. So this is the period where recertifications were being extended. The darker blue is July, yellow is August, green is September, and orange is October. One of the things you should note is that kind of prior to the pandemic, the top two reasons for a case closure were work sanctions and not having documentation, verifications, or non-cooperating with the eligibility process. Work sanctions have largely disappeared as a case closure reason due to COVID flexibilities related to work requirements. Documentations have also come down. What increased in the period after, in the initial months of the recertification, were case closures due to not reapplying. This was a relatively smaller portion of the case closure reason prior to the pandemic, but it was over 40% in July, August, and September. This did come back down in October, and in October, the highest reason was income too high. You can go to the next slide. This is similar types of data, but for TDAP, it covers a different period of time. The red bars are fiscal 2018, the light blue is 2019, the darker blue is the first 5 months of 2020. So this is the information you would have seen during session. The yellow bar is kind of the December to June, the early pandemic months. And then the green is July to September, so the beginning of fiscal 2021. So those are the months where the recertifications were beginning again. As you can see, similar to the TCA, there was a big increase in case closures due to failure to reapply. During the kind of early pandemic period, the December to June period, there was a spike in closures due to the individual being determined to be not totally disabled. DHS does indicate that there has been a trend of recipients not securing that final disability determination from medical providers. You can go to the next slide. This is a brief piece of information about the pandemic EBT benefits. This is broken down into the 2019-2020 school year. Of course, this actually just covers the period in which schools were closed from the middle of March through the end of the school year in September, which at this point is all that's been issued for 2020-2021 school year. Schools had to meet a minimum of 5 consecutive days of school closure. The benefits are available to anyone who receives free or reduced priced meals. It also includes all students who are at a school with community eligibility. Because of who it covers people who both typically receive SNAP benefits and those who do not otherwise receive SNAP benefits, who are issued a specific card for these benefits. In fact, the largest portion of the recipients are people who do not otherwise receive SNAP. That's not necessarily to be unexpected because the reduced price meals program has a higher eligibility, and the community eligibility provision might cover people who might not otherwise be income eligible. In the spring period, the benefits were $570 per day. Households received just about $370. In the September period, the benefits were slightly higher because there was a change in the reimbursement rate for the school year. The actual benefit amounts varied by jurisdiction based on the number of days the schools would have otherwise been open in September. On November 16, 2020, USDA issued the guidance on the extended program for the 2020-2021 school year. It had been expired until the continuing resolution. Only one state, Massachusetts, has been approved. They were approved just last week. The program is also expected under the continuing resolution to be available to childcare programs experiencing closures. There's not been guidance issued yet on how that portion of the program will work, however. You can actually skip the next couple slides and go right to the appendix. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm not going to cover that, but if you are interested, the appendix has information by school district on how the benefits were issued by school district in the 2019-2020 school year in terms of the number of recipients. And that's all I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, and I apologize for clicking off my video, but I'm trying to save bandwidth because my kid's in school. So are there any questions for Tanya and her presentation? Delegate Valentino Smith.
All right, Tanya, I just want to ask a quick question. When we look at the appendix, we see the totals. That doesn't necessarily, does that mean all that were eligible or all that actually got it?
Those are the people that receive the benefits. Everyone who was known to be eligible, to my knowledge, everyone who was known to be eligible for the benefits received benefits. There was no separate application process, so there was not there were not people who were known to be eligible that might have been denied as a result.
So we'll follow up with the panels for Prince George's County. What we were hearing from a lot of the food hunger calls that we were on was that the local school department, Prince George's County, sent the figures over to MSDE on who was eligible. And then MSDE was sent the information to DHS. And then we've got to follow up with DHS because it wasn't that cards were automatically sent. It's that they were sent information on what they needed to do to get the benefit, so that we need to find out whether a lot more people were eligible and just didn't administratively follow through to get the benefit, or if cards were automatically mailed or not. It's your understanding cards were automatically mailed to everybody then?
It's my understanding that people receive the benefits. Now, there were some complications because they had information, DHS had the information that they needed to send cards to the people or to increase, for people who were SNAP recipients, they just increased, put the benefits on the card they already had. for the people who are not SNAP recipients, they might not have had all of the information they needed to send the cards. So they may have had to reach out to people, but my understanding was that they worked, attempted to work with people, with the households on that issue, and were able to provide benefits. I guess I cannot speak to whether there were people that they were not able to reach, but my understanding was they were working with the school districts and the households to get benefits to all who are eligible.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that that's going to be part of the point today on we're seeing numbers on people that received it, but what we're trying to drill down to is the numbers of people that actually qualified and the numbers then that actually received it. So we don't have a delta or an unexpected or unfortunate delta, or we know there's a delta and we dig in with the resources needed to get the benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Sounds good. Delegate Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the overview. Just a brief question, and probably goes to the department more. Two of the counties that are listed for both TCA, traveling too much, and SNAP recipients are two of the counties that I represent, and quite alarming numbers to be over 100% on TCA. And just for to note, Prince George's and Calvert counties are what I'm looking at. Is there any particular, I guess I would be curious to know it says from February to October. I guess I would be curious to know the delivery of information to recipients or potential participants in the programs and the response. And maybe that is for the department, but do you know from your?
I do not know specifically how the department conducted outreach. I would note that generally obviously most of the jurisdictions experience fairly significant increases in unemployment, and the increases in recipients did appear to kind of follow that. In Prince George's County, for example, the unemployment rate data that I've looked at through October indicates that their unemployment rate didn't come down quite the same way that some of the other jurisdictions had. So that would indicate that some of the reason for the increases that were particularly large in those jurisdictions were unemployment related. I can't speak to specifically how they did outreach though.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Delegate Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Zimmerman, for the detailed packed presentation. My question gets at the slides on pages 9 and 10, where the income too high category was a disqualifier for benefit recipients, specifically in the month of October, where that seemed to increase sharply. Do we know if that number is reflective of any absorption of pandemic unemployment benefits, or is that number exclusive of that? Or are we to take away from that people were working and earning wages, and that's reflective of earned income that was too high to meet the threshold for those benefits?
My understanding is that regular unemployment benefits count as income. But my understanding is that those special programs did not count. I think the department can probably confirm that. But it is possible that it's reflective of earned income as people returned to work from the initial closures of businesses.
Thank you.
All right, Delegate Branch.
Delegate Branch, could you unmute yourself?
I'm sorry. Good morning, and thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm interested in the SNAP. One, you said you didn't have data for November. Is it a reason you don't have that data?
So the data is often available about 3 weeks after the close of the month. The way that I receive the data for the recipients is for SNAP is different than for TCA and TDAP. What I have is SNAP cases, which indicates that there is an increase, but it doesn't. There are more recipients than there are cases to make it comparable to the other data presented in that chart. I did not include it because it's a very different number. But
so on recertification, you said there were some people didn't mail their cards back in, and so a lot of them were left out. And I guess that's as a result of the news article, the news report that was in Baltimore about people not receiving their money. Some said they couldn't get through. It's tough. It was a pretty good segment on that. So I'm just wondering how many of those were left hanging out there that should have recertified, that did not. And what was as Delegate Jackson mentioned, what was the outreach? There had to be, if I had a department and I knew that there were a lot of people out there that weren't receiving monies that they should receive or was not reapplying, given the situation of COVID, I would have had an outreach team of some sort. So was there any outreach team? Did we do anything like that as a department?
I cannot speak specifically to what the department did in terms of outreach. Typically, they would reach out to recipients to let them know that a recertification period was coming and the information that they would need to provide for that. I can't speak to whether there was anything specifically done this time. There was a fairly significant increase about people who did not reapply. It's unclear the reason. The data I have doesn't speak to whether people chose not to reapply because they knew they were back to work versus that they didn't understand that they didn't reapply or were not able to complete the process due to other issues.
Many weren't back to work because they couldn't even go out. I mean, we had shut down everything. People wasn't going to work. We kind of stopped within that period, especially when we left the General Assembly session back in March. So a whole lot had stopped. So a lot of people were not going back to work. So in light of people having a rough time, your cases going up, the cases at unemployment going up, I would think, and we were inundated with stuff from unemployment, but in your case, I would think being social and people and people that's not as fortunate as some of us in those situations that were not able to receive their checks, I would think that we would have a team to try to reach out to find out, because many of those people just was out in the cold. And I'm not going to belabor this. And what was that? Do you know what number or how many people there were that did not were not recertified that needed to be? Do you have a number?
During the initial months of the pandemic, there was a suspension of recertifications. If you go to slide 8, if you can pull that up, that I had, it had for SNAP, that showed the actual number of case closures by week. I can give you just some rough estimates of the weeks of spikes. So that first, these are the months after the recertifications restarted. So that first spike, that was about 50,000 case closures. The second was about 60,000. And the third was over 175,000. During those 3 weeks, more than 90% were due to failure to reapply. I can't speak to why specifically people didn't reapply. But
We still have caseworkers or no?
yes.
Would they not want to
Workers are
check
still working.
on that, I guess?
So I think.
Okay, I don't want to belabor. I know other people have questions and I don't want to. So that's my last question. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. But if you could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
We did see an increase in applications in October. Again, I don't have November data yet, but there was a sizable increase in applications for SNAP, TCA, and TDAP in the month of October, which would indicate that at least some portion of the people whose cases were closed were attempting to reapply for benefits.
And I would add, Delegate Branch, I think that those questions might be best suited for the department itself. It is our understanding that in addition to being subject to a hiring freeze this year, the department's call center staff were also seconded over to labor because of the larger issue of unemployment processing that didn't take place either. So I think the department was hamstrung by the administration in staffing in order to get a lot of this process. We may want to talk to, it's on the agenda to talk to the department on those questions to see what we're doing to make up for that loss of staffing.
She's with DLS, I assume.
Tanya's our DLS analyst, yes.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Tanya. I thought you were with I came on late and I thought you were with the department. So please forgive me.
We'll have them next. Don't worry.
Yes.
So with that, not seeing any more questions, let's go ahead and bring on the department. Let's see, from the department, I have a whole screen of people here. So give me a second here. I have.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like, I'd be happy to introduce our panel.
Perfect, because I have the little split screen here going and I don't see
I know.
it. So Lauren Graziano for the intergovernmental relations staff for the department, please feel free to introduce the folks here from the department who will be presenting today.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to everyone else. Again, Lauren Graziano, Director of Government Affairs for the department. This afternoon, we have a presentation for you, focuses on mostly SNAP, TCA, and our other public assistance programs. Speaking to you this afternoon, we have Netsonic Kibret, our Deputy Secretary for Programs. We have with her our Deputy Executive Director for the Family Investment Administration, Augustine, I'm not even going to try to pronounce your last name. I'm so sorry. And also our State Compliance Director, Ms. LaBelle Hillgrove as well. And just for your awareness, I know in preparing for today's briefing, it was mentioned that there may be some jurisdictional specific questions, particularly around Baltimore City. And so if those do come up, we do also have Brandy Stocksdale, our Executive Director for Baltimore City DSS, in our, we'll call it our virtual gallery, to help us answer any questions. So with that, I'm going to invite Netsonic to step us through our presentation. Thank you so much.
And I will, before we do that, Netsonic, we know that you all, when you come to present to us, you provide a great deal of information, and we are appreciative of that. I would ask that you save sort of the general information for the budget briefing that we will be having during session starting next month, and that we focus this presentation specifically on the questions and concerns that were directed to all of you in the letter from myself and Vice Chair Valentino Smith. Okay, so Netsonic, take it away.
Thank you, Chairman Resnick. If I didn't know better, I would say you were limiting my opening remarks, but yeah, I won't speculate. So Chairman Resnick and members of the House Appropriations Health and Social Services Subcommittee, on behalf of the Department of Human Services, we thank you for the invitation to speak before you again. We appreciate your continued interest and support of our work to ensure that Maryland citizens who are in need have the resources they need to live healthy and productive lives. And I will keep these remarks brief, but with the COVID-19 pandemic impacting lives across the state, our work has never been more critical. The department's Family Investment Administration now serves over 600,000 more individuals compared to pre-pandemic caseload levels, which represent a 61% increase in the number of cases served. We are comprised of 1,700 FIA team members stationed across our 24 jurisdictions. They've really stepped up and spared no effort to ensure that our services continue to be available to those in need despite a very challenging and often rapidly changing operating environment. So Ms. Zimmerman ably shared data showing our caseloads for SNAP and TCA. We won't repeat that information. I would like to highlight just a few program initiatives which will be described in more detail by fellow panelists so that you have the data that you need to make those informed decisions. Since March, we have implemented pandemic EBT, provided $214 million in benefits to over 400,000 children who were eligible for free or reduced price meals due to COVID-19. We've implemented emergency allotment, collaborated with our local food banks to distribute over $30 million worth of emergency food assistance, and successfully collaborated with many of our vendors to create new models of service delivery. So we have prepared a short PowerPoint presentation for you to address the questions that you submitted to our agency in preparation for this hearing. And with that, I will turn it over to Augusta Nabaganyimana. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Resnick and members of the subcommittee. It is also my pleasure to join you this afternoon. Yes, I will go over the information again in this presentation, which was prepared based on the questions that you sent to us all. So for whoever is driving the slides, if you might push the next slide, please. I will start by giving you a quick update regarding the pandemic PBT program. As Tanya shared, we have provided benefits to nearly 500,000 children unable to access school meals through the traditional National School Lunch Program. This is a program that is implemented in collaboration with MSTE. They conduct eligibility determination, collect data on eligible students, and we issue benefits and manage customer service concerns. The October 1 continuing resolution expanded benefit until September 2021. The program extension also expanded eligibility to certain children in daycare facilities. I would relate what Tanya has already shared, that the guidelines for issuing benefit to this newly eligible population have not been provided by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We anticipate that the benefit will resume in January after our PBT plan has been approved. The newly eligible children will receive new cards unless their household is on SNAP, and the benefit will be, in which case the benefit would be uploaded on their existing EBT card. Students who were eligible last spring but have since graduated from PEBT will not be eligible for benefits. I will note that approximately 60% of PEBT recipients are not SNAP recipients. There are about 138 newly designated CEP schools, and we are happy to be able to extend the benefit to those students, to the students from those schools. I know that someone did ask questions as to the children who might have been eligible for September benefits but did not receive the benefits. So let me speak to that for a minute. We used the school year 2019-2020 school enrollment data to issue September benefits. But because there's a cohort of newly eligible students that we did not have information on, those would have missed September benefits. So for instance, there is a cohort of about 60,000 students, kindergartners who enroll in the Maryland public schools every single year. So at the time that we issued September benefits, which had to be issued by September 30th, based on federal requirements, we had the MSD had not had an opportunity to collect that data from local school systems. I want to assure you that MSD has been working closely with the local school systems to collect that data. And I'm happy to report here today that those who did miss benefit but were eligible will receive benefits by the end of this week. The number of eligible of the recipients is approximately 56,000. And again, that 56,000 includes those newly enrolled in the school systems, as well as many students from those 138 newly designated CEP schools. Next slide. You asked us to speak to the number of EBT cards that were issued between March and October. I'm not going to go over each data point on this slide, but I would like to highlight a few things. So you can see on the bottom row, the number of EBT cards issued remains steady. You see a huge jump in the month of June. That is reflective of the initial PEBT benefits that were being issued. The numbers in the month of July, as well as the month of September, also reflect new PEBT recipients. That's why those numbers are high. Next slide. And you did ask us to speak to how many computer deliveries were still outstanding. I'm happy to report to you that all employees who need access to a computer to work in remote, to perform their job in the remote environment have been issued equipment. In terms of how many, whether case managers are available to provide technical assistance to customers, presumably customers who might be having difficulty accessing MyDHR. We direct our customers who have technical issues to contact the call center or any of our 21 SNAP outreach partners who support, who help us conduct outreach and support SNAP recipients in many ways. The SNAP outreach partners have continued to be an integral part of our administration of SNAP program, and we are very grateful for their continued commitment and service to our many customers. There was a question as to the number of staff assigned to opening and scanning determinations. I would note that the number of staff assigned to the specific eligibility decision task fluctuates from one day to another based on the need in a specific local department for that day. So it's kind of hard to give you a specific number here, but be assured that those the workload is something that each local department of social services looks at on a daily basis and then assigns available staff accordingly. Next slide. How often is mail collected? Our local departments of social services have been instructed to check the mail and collect the mail on a daily basis. This is a function within each of our local departments. How many staff were assigned to processing determination from July to September? We have family investment specialists who perform eligibility work, including applications, determination, interim changes, and other tasks on a daily basis. So there's no specific staff assigned to determination only, but they do the generalists who are able to perform all the eligibility functions. How many determinations? Well, received but not processed until after SNAP benefits were terminated. I can share with you that the for cases for which a reviewed document had been received do not have been closed. We are currently, I know that Mrs. Zimmerman shared data on the number of cases that closed in September, and we have been taking a closer look at that caseload. Many of those individuals have reapplied and are now open cases. And for those that remain closed, we are reviewing each individual case to make sure that they were closed accurately. Next slide. Did the department request any additional staffing to assist with application processing? We have a very close working relationship with the Department of Budget Management, and they make sure that we have adequate resources to support our work. For instance, we recently received approval to fill 90 vacant positions, which will be critical as we look into planning and making sure that we have adequate capacity as current waivers start expiring. I'll also note here that we just don't look at human resources as the only opportunity to improve upon our processes. We are looking at, where we might be able to streamline our resources and then enhance our response to the pandemic and related customer needs. Was there funding for the department that could have, was there funding the department could have requested, pursued to hire additional staff? We are currently, we did not speak to this earlier, but the new PBT program does allow the agency to bill for 100% of administrative cost. And so we are including in our PBT plan, we have included a request for additional, for administrative funding, which again will contribute towards our efforts to continue to improve customer service and meet basic needs. Next slide. How many of the households that were terminated from SNAP in July, August, September subsequently reapplied? We have about 83,000 that have reapplied to date, as of last week, I should say. And again, we are continuing to review those that have not yet reapplied to confirm that the cases were closed accurately. What is the transition plan for any expiring waivers? We are committed to continuing to pursue all available waivers. The waivers that were available as a result of the continuing resolution, we did pursue. We pursued a waiver to postpone redeterminations for 6 months. So the determination that were due in October are going to be due in April, in the month of April. The determination that were due in November will be due in the month of May, and so on. We have begun developing a plan for handling redeterminations once they start becoming due in the month of April, and I'll speak to that a little later in this presentation. Next slide. So in terms of ongoing planning to manage redeterminations, so the table to your left are the number of redeterminations by program area. And in terms of what we are doing, we know we anticipate the highest number of redeterminations in the month of April through July. We are considering a multi-pronged strategy for making sure that we have adequate resources and support to do this work. In addition to the hiring of the 90 family investment specialist positions that are currently vacant, we will be conducting outreach to encourage customers to submit their redeterminations early. It becomes very challenging when if you have most customers submitting their redeterminations within the last week of the redetermination month, for instance. So we believe that if we can encourage customers to submit redeterminations on, we can will be equipped to much more manage that work, the workload. We can do this outreach using social media. We have access to customer email addresses, which we have used for over the summer to reach customers for other important messaging. And we know that we can rely to many of advocates as well as SNAP outreach partners to help us get the messaging out. We are also exploring technological solutions to manage documents, which we know would be critical to the overall redetermination process. Next slide. Call center wait times here. So early in the pandemic, we were experiencing extremely higher than normal call volumes. We have adapted to this situation. So as you can see at the bottom of the table on your left, the number of the average number of call center agents available has more than doubled to, if you compare current levels to August and to the month of August and before. This has helped us cut the the average wait time from a little over 15 minutes back in August and September to 4 minutes as of on average in the month of December. So this is a very critical step, again, as we think about the way we conduct the business moving forward. As I shared, the pandemic, no one could have predicted the pandemic as well as the challenges that would bring to our work. But we continue to learn from the information the data we're able to glean from internally, but also from advocates and you all in terms of what we can do to continue to adapt to the rapidly changing environment and to continue to meet customer expectations. I believe this next, the last slide. And so we'll take any questions you might have.
Hey, thank you very much. Let's see if we have any questions. We do. We have plenty of questions. We'll start with Delegate Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the presentation. It did address a couple of my concerns. But in addition to the notification component, so again, I go back to the slides where we're showing maybe 4 counties and jurisdictions, or at least 4, that have the high increase in cases. And obviously, with your work with, could you kind of explain a little further, briefly, obviously, your working relationship with MSDE, Department of Commerce, and others as you're identifying those who are having challenges. And then lastly, something that's also come to the forefront as you all have addressed your connectivity challenges in your office. Could you talk about the digital divide challenges with the customers or prospective customers going forward? Thank you.
So I'm going to invite maybe Augustine to take that question.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Yes, so I will start with our working relationship with MSDE. We work with MSDE specifically on pandemic EBT-related issues. The MSDE has done a great job, and it's a great partner in the implementation of that program. They work with local school systems to collect data on eligible students. There are some challenges associated with that as well, because various school systems, as independent school systems, have different policies as to how often the data that they maintain is updated. And so one of the challenges we first early on was the accuracy of the mailing addresses for the PEBT cards. We did receive over 10,000 returned PEBT cards, and we have working with MSDE. We have been in touch with many of those families and have issued those cards to the rightful recipients. But that is an ongoing work. I believe as of today, we have less than 2,500 remaining to be issued, and so so those are some of the the access issues related to the PBT program that I know you're hearing about, and we hear about them as well. With regards to regular SNAP and TCA eligibility work, we work with one outreach, SNAP outreach partners. They are in local communities. In many respects, they understand the needs of our customers, as well, if not more than we do, and we rely upon them to provide us with counsel in terms of what we can do to best serve those customers. We meet with those organizations at least twice a month. In some of them, depending, because we hold so many meetings, we meet them almost on a weekly basis in various settings. So we view them as being critical to our work. And basically, our ability to provide services is enhanced thanks to the work that they do in the advocacy that they bring to make sure that we are aware and addressing customer issues.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Digital divide.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that question, and sorry, I almost forgot that one. So, our customers are very savvy, and as we continue to adapt, and so they have. Pre-pandemic, a little less than 25% of applications were for benefit, including SNAP, TCA, and others, was submitted via MyDHR, which is our consumer portal. That number has increased to more than 90%. So the majority of people are able to access our services online. However, we do recognize that not everyone, not 100% of our customers have the technological know-how to access our services. That is why we have organizations such as the Maryland Hunger Solutions, Benefit Data Trust, Catholic Charities, who quickly created hotlines, basically, and staffed it to make sure that those customers unable to access MyDHR can continue to receive adequate services. We, knowing that they needed support, we pursued further funding to increase our SNAP outreach budget to ensure that those organizations had the capacity to do that work. We requested a little under $500,000 to support the work of those SNAP outreach entities. And in our federal fiscal year SNAP outreach plan, we did request over $1 million in additional SNAP outreach dollars to continue to support the outreach work that they're doing, and we value so much.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll follow up offline as well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Vice Chair Jackson. Let's move to Vice Chair Geraldine Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the department for trying to be as forward and specific as you can with the questions that we sent. So if we could just look a little bit at question 9, which talked about the drop off. So 143,000 cases closed from July through September, and due to a failure to complete a redetermination. I want to flesh through that because it's very important. Those are a lot of families not receiving the most basic needs that we have or try to provide during this, which is food. It's my understanding that the department did not apply for a continuation of the waiver, which would have then allowed the recipients to continue. And so what I'd like to understand is, one, why the department did not, if it did not apply for a waiver for continuation of allowing the people to stay on the benefit, and that surrounding jurisdictions did apply for the waiver and were granted it for those summer months. So one, what happened and why we didn't continue on with a waiver? Could we have? It appears that other states did. And then you talked about the delta now between 143,000 and 83,000. So about 60,000, I don't like doing math out loud, but about 60,000 appear to be languishing out there that did not come back on. And you said you were case managing them. And I'd like to know kind of what the expectation is for those 60,000 and us being able to understand, will it be in January when we get to the budget hearings on the success rate that you've had with them? Or you said you're waiting to hire 90 new people. When do you expect those 90 new people on to be able to work with this case management for that? And so that's the one question. And then Mr. Chairman, I do have another question on pandemic SNAP.
Yes, so thank you.
Yeah, Augustine, I'm sorry, Augustine, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Lauren. So in terms of the difference between the 140 plus that are closed and those who have since reapplied and are now open and receiving benefits, we have a group of case workers who are reviewing those cases that remain closed to make sure that they were closed properly. If for any reason they were closed improperly, we are reaching out to those customers individually, getting what we need to reactivate their cases.
No, I appreciate that. And the question is, why did we end up with the closure rate? Because the waiver expired and we didn't reapply for it.
Yeah, and understood. In late June, as the numbers of COVID-19, seem to be dropping in some quarters of the country, there was really a push by our federal funding agency, USDA, to get the state to find, and I use the quote, the new normal. It was very clear to us that really the messaging that was coming from the feds that we needed to, to start thinking about what does an operation without SNAP waivers look like. And so, in Maryland is not unique in that, many states, including, DC, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, did actually not have a redetermination waivers for the month of September, which is when many of the cases that you're referring to closed. I indicated earlier that, we've been learning to a lot through this pandemic. I think in hindsight, knowing how the numbers, COVID-19 numbers, go up and down from 1 month or from 1 week to another, perhaps we should have pursued the waiver and let the feds deny it. We didn't, again, based on the messaging that we're getting from our federal partners. But what we're doing right now is trying to look back and remedy the cases, if any, was closed improperly. And as you requested,
Thank you.
we'll be sharing.
Thank you. And you'll give us an update then in January. And I do appreciate the sincerity of the response, that in acknowledging that in retrospect, the better decision for Maryland would have been to apply for the waiver, and other states were granted it so that people didn't drop off. My second question then is with respect to pandemic EBT. You provided us with a lot of information. My very specific question is, for those, you said 60% were not otherwise eligible for SNAP. So 60% of the families didn't have the card that you could automatically load the money on. They had to get a card. Did your vendors automatically mail to all of the addresses that MSDE sent you? Or did those families have to do something, a condition precedent, in order to have the card mailed?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so you are correct. Those 40% who had an active SNAP case received benefit on their card. Those 60% that did not have an active case received a new PBT card on the address on the record. That was an automatic process. There's data cleansing processes internally that we had to do to make sure, we have technology that can validate addresses, and where there was validation issues, we worked with MSC to resolve that, upfront. But the customer did not have to do anything in order to receive benefit, and that remains the case today.
Thank you. And my final question then is, you testified that the counties that had the most significant increase, you had a 61% increase in having to get benefits to people. That's extraordinary, requiring a huge deployment of services. And so to the counties like Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County, were additional services deployed to them? Were additional resources deployed to them, to their local departments, to deal with the significant increase that they had? And if so, when were those resources deployed?
Yeah, thank you again for the question. So basically what we did in order to manage workload statewide, we instituted what we call SPM, or statewide management process. And what the SPM, and the reason that we did institute that model is exactly what you're referring to. We wanted to make sure that if we're seeing higher increases in the caseload from one geographic area, but not others, that we were able to move cases to those jurisdictions that were in a position to assist. So the model has helped, from early on, did help us send cases from, those jurisdictions that were realizing high increases to those that did not have as much as high increases, so that they could help process those cases. So it was not a matter of necessarily getting, additional resources, but it was a strategy for managing that work statewide as one DHS, and to ensure that not anyone particular jurisdiction was more impacted than the other.
When do you expect the 90 new employees to be on board and ready to do case management services?
Luckily, we have a very active human resources department. What they shared with us last week is that we do have over 3,000 applicants for the position in the family investment classification. The 90 pins were distributed to the appropriate local departments, and they were notified. And so I anticipate that the hiring processes are going to begin, this week will probably continue through January. So, our hope and our plan is to get those positions filled, by February, and it's only ahead of the next wave of redeterminations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for helping us by January to keep an eye on these significant cases for the very basic need of food, so we know where we stand at the budget hearing. Mr. Chairman, the only slide that's outstanding that hasn't been discussed, but maybe Ms. LaBelle Hillgrove is going to, so we'll hold the question, is why we saw such a significant drop in TDAP. But I think that's probably going to come up as the department pursues its presentation.
I don't believe the department has any more presentation. Is that correct? I believe we're in questions now.
Right, yeah, so our formal presentation is over, but if there is a question about TDAP, I don't know if perhaps NetSonnet or someone else maybe can address that.
I mean, clearly
Delegate
we were
Branch,
being.
why don't you go ahead and ask the question, and then we can move on to Delegate Branch's question afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Then clearly we saw a slide that showed us that the state is seeing unusually low numbers for TDAP. And I don't know that that necessarily means that people were no longer permanently disabled or that they had then qualified for the federal benefit, but that maybe they couldn't get to their doctor, as most of us couldn't get to our doctor. But how is the department approaching or addressing the fact that this population's numbers are unusually low? And what are they doing for them? Because it's my understanding that this and food and maybe a small housing voucher are the only help that they receive, even pre-pandemic.
Yeah, Lorna, I can take that question. So, yeah, the TDAP program is one that we also continue to monitor very closely. You're correct. The numbers have reduced significantly, and we are assessing the data to determine what might be the contributing factors. One thing that we know, and it is clear, is that, as a condition of being eligible for the program, you do have to provide medical proof of disability. And so we do anticipate that, with many doctors, now offering only services in a remote environment, where those customers might, not have the technology to observe those medical appointments, that might be a barrier that we're taking a look at. I suggest that maybe we get back to you after we assess, we analyze the data, to determine what other, if any, what additional barriers, if any, do exist, and formulate, I guess, a plan on how we might support the customers to make sure that they are not being unfairly impacted by the barriers beyond their control.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate that. I know to the department, we call them customers, but I know the secretary and all of you realize that these are the most needy and disabled, receiving probably the least amount of help. And so the suffering that they may be going through without that little bit of money per month is probably significant. And so I appreciate your willingness to get back to us in January, and thank Ms. Graziano and the secretary's willingness to try to be very specific and honest with these projections and the significance of the number of families that we're finding in the Delta, and trying to find them as fast as you can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Wonderful, thank you. And now we'll go to Delegate Branch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Many of the questions that I had have been answered, as most people can could see that was in their report. So, but I am delighted to know that one of the main questions I had was that on streamlining the time that people were waiting, and that's now down to 4 minutes. That's exceptional. And to now be on top of these recertifications is great too. I know when the chairman first had the hearing, back, I can't think what month it was, but one of the first hearings we had, the SNAP did not seem to be that much of a problem. But now I'm glad to see that there's a focus in the fact that we are dealing with it, and that you have been looking at it and figured out ways in which you can rectify it. The numbers of 85,000 in April is incredible to hear, as even those in the ensuing months that followed April. But to see that you're working with it is great. But one of the things I wanted to ask was that with the workers, I mean, I know that they should be doing, I don't know if they've changed their role, but I thought outreach was a major part of a worker's responsibility. Is that still not true?
Yeah, thank you for the question.
So sorry, Augustine, I was going to invite maybe LaBelle to speak to outreach a little bit. I know she's sort of our resident expert in that area. Unless, Augustine, you wanted to sort of tee things up, and we can let LaBelle supplement your response.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you. I'll speak briefly and then invite LaBelle to add to my response as well. So the the issue of outreach, basically each of our eligibility workers is empowered to reach out to a customer if they need anything in order to process their case. And they do that every single day as part of their work. Where SNAP outreach organizations help tremendously is number one, helping identify those who are eligible for services but have not yet applied. That we believe that is a critical component of our work, because we as we continue to provide benefit to those who are who have already found their way and applied for assistance, we also want to identify those who need services but have not yet accessed services. And those organizations, our SNAP outreach budget alone is a little over $5 million. And so we believe that by outreach organizations providing that service, our eligibility workers can place a razor focus on processing eligibility and making eligibility determination, and that's critical. But you're right. We all at the department are empowered to reach customers if there's anything that we need from a specific customer to ensure that they receive their benefit. But LaBelle, I will invite you to add anything that I might have missed.
Great afternoon. Thank you, Augustine. You are correct. Our local department is doing a great job in terms of being able to provide for the needs of our customers. We have transitioned, to speak directly to the delegates' question, and many local departments prior to statewide processing have already transitioned from a caseload model to a process management model. As you could imagine, with the unprecedented amount of applications, as well as overall the increase in applications, having that one-on-one case manager responsible for 10 plus 1,000 applications is not necessarily the most effective in terms of ensuring timely eligibility processing. So some of our largest jurisdictions have transitioned to that process management model prior to the state going into a statewide processing management model.
You probably would not have had this issue with this recertification had they reached out. That's my whole point. Because you had so many that were not responding, and they were not responding to them. So you just had that hanging out there, And that way you're rectifying the problem, sure, and I appreciate it. Maryland, state of Maryland, and us as legislators appreciate it, but the problem would have never happened had they been doing the job of the outreach. If you are a social worker, and they didn't just stop doing this now with the pandemic, they had been stopped doing that outreach to customers. And that's what made me ask, how come? And if the roles had changed, if they have, they have. But I just.
So I want to also just speak to the fact that we have collaborated, as Augustine stated, with our outreach partners to be able to provide effective communication to those individuals. We have utilized our call center to ensure that they have the first responsive information immediately. So when customers did call our call center, they were provided the correct and accurate, timely information. In addition, we utilize our MyDHR universe in terms of the emails and those individuals who have established accounts to send out multiple email blasts there. And we've partnered with our communication department to ensure that we had social media platforms covered with information. So I do understand that caseload management model does provide another level of touch to the customer, but we've, as a state, have also transitioned with the times to be able to utilize other available models to ensure that our customers were getting the information. So we do acknowledge your concern, and we do understand that as we're taking this into account as we're making room for improvement as we are modernizing things moving forward.
And I think the 90 positions, the positions that you're seeking, is that for outreach solely, or is that come with other responsibilities? You're seeking some positions.
Yeah, so I know Augustine probably can speak to this as well, but I know in part these are also going to be case management roles for eligibility determination, and we are also always seeking opportunities to increase our outreach. So this is something that can be taken into consideration.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We also have a question from Delegate Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for the late question. I had misunderstood the order of presentation. I thought there would be another portion of presentation, and I was waiting to see if the question was answered. I want to look to the future. We've had a great discussion on the troubleshooting that's happened about things that have gone wrong and gone right thus far. But we understand that COVID is a continuing moving challenge that the state is facing. And going forward, there may be additional times where the agency has to switch to a 100% remote working scenario. We understand that before, when the agency was in remote working scenario before, that we had an eviction moratorium in place on a federal level that was keeping a lot of the agency's customers housed with stability. We understood that we had a utility moratorium that a lot of our internet service providers, they were honoring that, even though they weren't subject to some of the restrictions, but a lot of them were honoring the utility moratorium as well. And so we know November 15th that stopped. So people are losing connectivity to their internet if they can't afford to keep up with the pace of the bills that are there. So going forward, if your agency has to pivot to a 100% remote work model, it will be in a different time of volatility for your customers. So I want to know what that looks like, how you keep that level of connection with them, and specifically looking at some of those services that are traditionally provided in person. One of the data points on your slide was issuing that EBT card if a person needed their card reissued at the counter. You did have some data provided on that. How would you keep up and maintain those types of services for your customers going forward if you have to pivot to 100% remote model, understanding that the circumstances will be very different likely this time than it was the last time?
Sure. I'm going to invite either Netsanit and possibly Augustine to answer that.
Thank you, Lauren. I'd like to take that one. So thank you for that question, Delegate. Serving our customers in a remote, in-person, hybrid model is a top priority. I'm here to serve. We consider ourselves advocates in terms of promoting the services that are available and encouraging marital settlements, federal and state entitlements. So in terms of honoring EBT cards that need to be issued on an emergency basis, we have issued guidance to our local departments of social services, clearly stating that emergency EBT cards must be issued in person on an as-needed basis. And so there will be no disruption in terms of what we call vault card or emergency SNAP EBT card. In addition, if in-person services are needed to ensure that a person does not lose their benefits, essentially, that can be clear in guidance to our local departments of social services that they are to honor in-person engagement. And so we have carved out exceptions to the remote work mandate that speak to the needs of our customers, right? To the work that we do. As we continue to monitor what's happening on the ground through both local departments of social services and the advocacy community that you're going to hear, we will continue to incorporate that feedback into our operational model.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing
Thank you.
no additional questions, I want to thank the department. I would actually like to ask the department to stick around. We're going to hear from some advocates and some folks who are direct beneficiaries of the programs and the issues that they have been having with the department. And I would very much appreciate if the department can hear those directly. Obviously, having these individuals on gives you the opportunity to help them directly fix their individual problems, but they are also indicative of the issue, wider issues that also need to be addressed. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to some of the advocates. Regan Vaughn from Catholic Charities, I think you are probably leading this panel, if I'm not mistaken. If you can introduce the other folks that are going to be speaking with you.
Sure. First, we are going to have Stacy Jefferson, who is our chair of Marylanders Against Poverty. And then we do have two consumers, Rona Rice and Amanda E., who will be speaking, followed by Michelle Medeo and Michael J. Wilson. So I will let Stacy take it away and then I'll close it.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the subcommittee. My name is, again, Stacy Jefferson, and I'm here as the co-chair of the Coalition for Marylanders Against Poverty. We're a coalition of service providers, faith communities, and advocacy organizations that are working to advance statewide public policy and programs that are necessary to alleviate the burdens faced by Marylanders living in or near poverty. I want to first thank the members of this subcommittee for your continued support and commitment to this issue, especially as we navigate the impact of COVID-19 in our state. And as you know, even before the pandemic, 1 in 10 Marylanders were living below or at the federal poverty line. The pandemic has only exacerbated the struggles of low-income individuals and families. It has also put a spotlight on the entrenched gaps, barriers, and inequities that have long existed in our programs and policies to address and end poverty, especially for Black and Brown communities. Additionally, it has disrupted the education of over 900,000 Maryland children across the state, approximately 431,000 of whom lost access to free or reduced price meals they relied on every day. We're now experiencing, as you know, massive unemployment rates, and as such have seen TCA and SNAP applications reach historic increases of upwards of about 300% in some months during this crisis. That's because these safety net programs provide vital resources to families in deep poverty. Studies show that children living in deep poverty are 5 times more likely to experience abuse and neglect and other adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, which begins a lifelong struggle with negative mental, behavioral, and physical health outcomes. The CDC estimates that lifetime costs associated with ACEs is approximately $2 trillion nationwide, and measures that prevent and address childhood trauma not only work to improve the public health of our state, but also have a high rate of return on investment. SNAP and TCA are some of the most effective anti-poverty tools we have. Not only do they help struggling working families make ends meet, but they also help to bring federal dollars into local economies, providing much needed economic relief. Maryland must continue to support and ensure benefits are fully funded and that the agencies providing these services are fully staffed so that families will not experience unnecessary disruptions in benefits. You'll be hearing from, again, persons with lived experience and my other colleagues who will give you more information about what they're seeing on the ground. And I just want to thank you for hosting this hearing today. And as always, MAP looks forward to continuing to work with you to addressing the underlying systemic causes of poverty. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on to our next panelist.
It looks like Rona is next.
Oh, yeah, Rona. Rona, would you like to speak? She might be having some technical issues.
Do you want to move on to the next witness?
Yeah, let's go on to the next one and then we'll come back to
back.
Rona. We can figure this out. Yeah.
So next on the agenda, we have Amanda E.
Yes, hi. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for having me here. I'm a single mom of 3. I applied for food stamps earlier this year and my case was never processed. I reapplied around the start of COVID. I received no response, even though I qualified to receive emergency food stamps within 7 days of filing my application. During that time, food prices had went up enormously. I remember at one point having to pay almost $12 for 4 chicken thighs and wondering in fear if I was going to be able to ration what food I had left to make enough for my kids to eat. I called DHS multiple times, often after long wait times and going through all the automated prompts, I would get disconnected. On the occasions I was able to get through, no one had any answers. I explained I qualified for emergency stamps. Weeks had passed, but my case was still not even processing in the system. Their response was to wait at least 30 days for emergency stamps to be processed. In a panic, I got on social media to reach out to see if others were having the same problems as me or might have any solutions. I quickly realized that I was not alone. People were starving. People were begging other people for food that they could provide. No one had any idea where to turn and were living in fear of their children starving. I reached out to a representative that I found online who put me in contact with my local delegates. I reached out to the delegates on Twitter and I emailed them. They then put me in contact with a lawyer at the Homeless Persons Representation Project. Once I contacted them, they were able to get my case processed, and within 1 week, I had food for my kids. I did my best to provide HPRP's information to anybody that I found with the same circumstances as mine online, but I can only imagine the amount of people that had nowhere to turn and did not see my posts. In the middle of September, I received a letter stating my benefits would be canceled on September 30th if I didn't recertify by August 31st. The letter wasn't even sent by August 31st. I submitted the paperwork to DSS 3 ways. I sent it online, by mail, and dropped it at their drop box outside of DSS office. I attempted calling DHS multiple times to see if they received it. Each time I called, I waited on hold for hours. Nobody had any responses for me and told me that I just had to wait for it to be processed in the system. I finally got in touch with someone who explained that all redetermination letters were sent out late. She confirmed my redetermination was received in the system on September 21st, but the next day it was marked not received. She said she would send an email to someone to contact me in regards to the contradictory information. I followed up by calling DSS many more times. They kept saying their system was updating. Despite all my efforts, I could not get anyone at DSS to process my redetermination, even though I knew they received it. My case ended up getting closed out, and it was only opened again after I contacted a lawyer. When this happened, I reached out online again and found that I was not alone. Everyone that I came in contact with was also experiencing the same issues with their food stamps closing out. Many people had applied for food stamps months before and still were not even receiving them. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Rona, are you able to?
Well, can you hear me? I pressed *6. Am I unmuted?
No, we can hear you.
This
You're
is
good.
Rona. Oh, good. Okay. Well, this is Rona Reese. Thank you so much for allowing me to testify today. I'm a 76-year-old woman. I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and I've been living in poverty since 2015. And I've been a SNAP recipient since 2016. I'm also an advocate for people living with disabilities, many of whom are unemployed and living in poverty. And a few years ago, I went over to the supermarket to get some groceries using my EBT card, and I thought I'd get a rotisserie chicken, $4.99, and I learned that you can't use your SNAP benefits to purchase cooked food or prepared food, not just rotisserie chickens, but things like a salad or a prepared food. And I realized, although I'm not disabled, I realized this creates a serious hardship for people with physical and mental challenges and many seniors who are not able to prepare food. And I have some examples of that among my friends and family. My own son, who's an adult living with a mood disorder, and he's a SNAP recipient. He's been unemployed due to COVID, and he's been renting rooms to Airbnb, and many of the homeowners do not allow their tenants to share the kitchen. So he's living in a room. Sometimes he has a microwave oven, but he's not able to prepare nutritious meals, and he frequently buys microwave meals or eats in fast food. And I'm really concerned about this issue for my son and other SNAP recipients who are unable to prepare their meals. It's really affected his depression. Also, I have a friend named Judy. She's 86 years old, a woman with severe arthritis and pain in her hands. She's a SNAP recipient, but she cannot peel a potato, cut an apple. She couldn't use her hands to cut up a raw cabbage or celery. She definitely couldn't cut up a raw chicken. And yet her EBT card was rejected recently at Trader Joe's when she wanted to purchase their chicken salad. Another example is my friend Jack, a man in his mid-70s living with bipolar disorder, and he's currently homeless. He's using his disability income to pay for a motel room, but he's also a SNAP recipient, but the benefits can't be used because he doesn't have a kitchen, and he can't go to a supermarket where cooked foods are available, which is, why I'm speaking to you today. So Judy, Daniel, and Jack represent thousands of people in Maryland living with physical and mental challenges who are experiencing poor nutrition as well as food insecurity because of state legislation restrictions in the use of their benefits. And I feel that this is a discrimination against disabled people, which is unconscionable in my opinion. The change in SNAP benefits will not only help people with disabilities, but all people. For example, if you're a single parent on SNAP, you could purchase cooked and prepared dinners for your family, and you wouldn't need to spend as much time cooking and cleaning up. You could just get the food and eat it. And I also think it would be good for the economy as well, because it would increase revenue for the supermarkets and grocery stores. And the change would not require any increase in expense for the state. So I'm requesting that the Maryland legislators draft a bill that would allow the purchase of cooked and prepared foods using SNAP benefits. And I think if Maryland does it, it will set the way for the rest of the country. Thank you for letting me say my piece.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Anyone else?
I forgot to mention, I had one statistic I forgot to mention, that in Maryland, 28% of SNAP beneficiaries are people with disabilities. So that is approximately 183,000 Marylanders with disabilities who depend on SNAP.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reese. Is there anyone else
Yes,
signed up?
Mr. Chairman, the next person up is Michelle Solomon-Medeo.
Ms. Medeo, please.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Michelle Medeo. I'm a senior attorney with Homeless Persons Representation Project. Unfortunately, the experiences you heard from Rona and Amanda are not uncommon. This past spring, HPRP opened up a SNAP free legal help hotline, which connected us with hundreds of Marylanders across the state who are experiencing food insecurity and homelessness. We provided free legal representation to a lot of the people whose cases were closed due to that 3-month lapse in the federal waiver. Many of our clients never received a notice from the department with the paperwork that they needed to continue receiving benefits. Many families who speak Spanish or languages other than English received the paperwork only in English. Many people have a disability and needed an accommodation from the department in order to access, understand, and complete the paperwork. And we worked with countless people who turned in their redetermination paperwork on time, either by mail, online, or even in the Dropbox literally attached to the DSS office, and their case is still closed out. Because so many people whose cases closed were still eligible for benefits, the department received a high number of SNAP applications from August to present. We've seen significant delays in the processing of these applications. So many people who should have received benefits within 7 days of filing an application had to wait months. Other families who spoke Spanish received a call or follow-up paperwork in English and couldn't complete the application. When our clients have called the DHS call center, it was at least a 2-hour wait for someone to even pick up, and longer if the person did not speak English. The Baltimore City line disconnects before anyone even picks up. And when the department finally issues a decision on an application, many people still had to wait several additional weeks just to receive the EBT card that's needed to access and use benefits. As you heard the department testify, to this day, still 60,000 of the households that were terminated for redetermination issues are still not receiving SNAP benefits. Many of these households have not been able to reapply because of a variety of access issues. For example, not having a phone, access to the internet, host of other barriers. We've represented many of the families also who received TCA benefits and whose cases closed out during the pandemic, including a new mom who was fleeing an abusive relationship and staying in a shelter. The department terminated her TCA, which caused her to have no income for months. In order for her case to be reinstated, the department told her she must attend in person a work program. This meant that she had to leave the shelter with her 8-month-old baby in the cold using public transportation in the middle of a global pandemic. The department also asked her to apply for child support against the abuser, putting her in further fear of her and her child's life. None of this should have ever happened. And luckily there are easy solutions. The department should continue the moratorium on TCA terminations that it committed to at the start of the pandemic, and it should implement now HB 1313, the great legislation that this committee passed last session, instead of waiting until July 1st. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for this panel?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. We have 2 more.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
We're almost done though.
Getting ahead of myself. Please.
Michael Wilson, I think he got dropped and he is back on. He's
connecting up right now. Mr. Wilson, are you, can you hear us?
He looks like he's muted. Oh,
yep, there he is.
Had technical issues right there at the end. I apologize. So thank you for inviting me, giving me an opportunity to speak to the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for holding this hearing. My name is Michael J. Wilson. I'm the Director of Maryland Hunger Solutions. I have submitted testimony to the committee. I'm not going to read that. I'm just going to kind of summarize the things that I wanted to make sure that you heard today. First, I want to thank the Department of Human Services, as well as Maryland State Department of Education. They have worked very hard in a very challenging time to do what needs to get done. They haven't always succeeded, but I know that they have tried hard. And they know that our work with them as a partner is critical as well. And I want to second what Augustine said earlier. It's true, they did ask for additional funding to help SNAP partners like Maryland Hunger Solutions and others to help in a time when the state was reading record numbers of applicants. We were getting calls beyond the numbers which we could do, but we were glad to be able to help along with other SNAP application partners across the state. I also want to echo what my friend Rona said from Montgomery County. Rona has been an advocate for the restaurant meals program for a long time. We know that the state legislature passed the bill to implement this program. This is a program which has existed since 1978, and Maryland had never implemented it. It's specifically targeted to those who are seniors, homeless, and disabled, who otherwise cannot cook or prepare or store food. The governor signed the bill, and that happened in 2019, and we are still waiting for implementation. I know that DHS has had some challenges, but what has not been crystal clear to advocates or to folks in the state of Maryland like Rona, who said to me, Michael, they passed the bill, how come they're not doing anything? And there's been no communication about that. And so that's one of the challenges. When we do the right thing and we pass a bill, it gets signed by the governor, and nothing happens, it leads to real unhappiness for people feeling like they are not heard or listened to, or that they have any representation when they follow the rules in that way. The second thing I want to chat briefly about was pandemic EBT. So pandemic EBT is a success story. You can't understand how big a success story it is when we have two agencies, Department of Human Services and Maryland State Department of Education, working together to provide tens of millions of dollars to benefits to kids all across the state, because schools are out and they're not getting breakfast or lunch at school. But now they have benefits that they can actually spend for their families to make sure that they get food. This is an unprecedented new program, and we should all be very grateful. Partly, we should have had MSDE at this hearing as well, because they have part of the responsibility for pandemic EBT. And one of the ways that pandemic EBT has not been as successful as it could is to make sure that more kids who are in more schools that are getting free meals are actually covered. So it's not Department of Human Services' fault that they don't know, Mr. Chairman, that there are about a dozen schools in Montgomery County where kids get free meals, but because they're not under community eligibility, but under Provision 2, those kids did not get pandemic EBT. They did not get it. And so they not only are not getting meals, they're not getting pandemic EBT. And so we need to make sure that the coordination between the MSDE and DHS is clearer, and that there are clearer responsibilities, especially for MSDE, to make sure that we get as much of this out there as possible. Another success is online SNAP. So Maryland was a pilot state for online SNAP coming out of the 2018 Farm Bill. Didn't get done in 2018 or 2019, and all of a sudden we're in a pandemic and we're able to make it move forward. So that is a good thing for folks who are on SNAP to be able to do like anybody else, is to order online so they don't actually physically have to go to a grocery store. Part of the challenge is the few stores that were eligible. So I know there were 3 originally, and I understand more about to come on, but we need to make sure that as many, particularly many local stores who aren't part of big chains, have an opportunity to be able to provide SNAP benefits to residents all across our state. I'm not going to talk about the redeterminations. I think Rona and what's her name? Amanda E. talked about their own experiences. The one thing I will say is these are not just numbers. These are people whose lives were disrupted through no fault of their own. They were eligible for benefits. They're getting benefits. They get kicked off and they don't seem to have any recourse. And that's a tragedy, and we should try to fix that so that doesn't happen again. Making it happen to them was wrong, but we got to fix it so it doesn't happen anymore. The last thing I'm going to touch on is the coordination around the state. So, we have grocery stores, we have SNAP, we have WIC, we have the food banks, the Maryland Food Bank and the Capital Area Food Bank providing meals. We have lots of local organizations that are providing all of a sudden meals. We're catching as catch can to provide, make sure that we're dealing with hunger. If Maryland had a statewide food policy council, like the Montgomery County Food Policy Council, like the Prince George's Food Equity Council, like the Baltimore Food Pact, where we could centrally have a conversation about how we address food insecurity, programs across the state, in the private sector and the nonprofit sector, we could be more resilient in dealing with these issues. It would have been nice if we'd have had that in 2020, but we didn't. Fortunately, you're going to have an opportunity to consider legislation in 2021 to create a state food council to address these issues going forward. Because the one thing we know is we're going to have more challenges. It may not be a pandemic, but it'll be challenges that impact everybody, especially those who are experiencing poverty. Thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, our last panelist would be Regan Vaughn.
Yes. Hi, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Regan Vaughn, the Director of Advocacy at Catholic Charities of Baltimore. First, I just want to agree with the comments you heard from the previous panelists. I don't want to repeat them. But it has been a struggle for a number of Marylanders to secure benefits during the pandemic. And this hasn't been due to bad policies. In fact, for the most part, Maryland's really been out in front in terms of altering our policies and requesting waivers. But the significant staffing shortages we've seen and that have been discussed made it impossible to effectively implement a lot of these policy changes while they were dealing with the skyrocketing caseloads. It's a structural issue that's existed within DHS for probably a decade and a half, but has just been exacerbated by the pandemic. And unfortunately, our particularly vulnerable populations have really suffered. Those with limited English proficiency and those with disabilities. So I'm going to use my time to really focus on the TDAP program. It was discussed earlier in this hearing that the caseload is currently below the pre-pandemic caseload. And that's not how the social safety net's supposed to work. During a pandemic and economic hardship, our social safety nets, we'd expect it to expand and not contract. And so I did check in with our programs who are dealing with the TDAP population, and they identified a number of barriers we're seeing that are specific to the TDAP program, which is a program for disabled individuals without dependent children. The first is that an individual has to submit a medical form attesting to their long-term disability. And as you all know, it's been difficult to get in to doctors' offices right now, particularly ones who are willing to fill out this form. The second thing you have to provide is proof of a pending Social Security disability application. Social Security offices have been closed since March. And so it's a 2-hour wait on their call line to try to request proof. And then hopefully it can get to you. Because unfortunately, a lot of the TDAP population is experiencing homelessness and isn't always able to receive mail or emails. For those that have been able to overcome these 2 hurdles and get the forms, they then have to submit them to DSS. We know because of the population that they may be able to access electronic means, but more likely they're going to use those drop boxes at the DSS offices. Unfortunately, we now joke that those drop boxes are black holes. What's dropped off in those drop boxes are not getting matched up with applications. And that's because there simply isn't the staff at the DSS offices to do the casework, to figure out the matching and to get it done. There's no receipt provided when you drop it off, so you can't prove that you put anything in the box. And so cases aren't being approved. In the redeterminations that were done this summer, those cases were closed. That really doesn't have to be the case. And what we see at some of our Catholic charities programs is that's not happening because DSS caseworkers are assigned to those programs to be a point of contact. And in the case where the DSS workers are allowed to do casework, they are working with the clients to navigate the barriers, troubleshoot, search out documentation, and match it to the applications. We need the whole system functioning that way, and we need enough staff at our offices to do that. And so while I understand that PINs were allocated just last week to help with these issues, I would ask the committee to continue to watch this issue, especially during budget hearings, to make sure that our Department of Human Services is adequately staffed to deal with the populations we're working with. I also want to raise on the TDAP issue that last week, the governor announced $40 million to increase the temporary cash assistance benefit. Our understanding is this is going to result in an extra $100 per month for TCA families for the last 6 months of the year. And that's huge. We're excited to see that. Unfortunately, there was not a corresponding increase for TDAP. The TDAP benefit will remain at $243 a month. A very wise man posted on Facebook this morning that a $600 stimulus payment is not enough, that it's not enough for rent. $243 a month is not enough either. And through legislation 3 years ago, this committee worked to establish parity between TDAP and TCA and said the TDAP benefit should be 74% of the TCA benefit. For the remaining 6 months of the year, it's only going to be 54%. And so we would also urge this committee to once again support parity between TCA and TDAP and indicate support for a corresponding TDAP increase. Thank you very much for your time and for holding this hearing today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Regan, and thank you to all the panelists. And thank you for acknowledging my wisdom.
Brilliant, brilliant.
I wanted to see if there are any questions from any of the legislators, whether they're on the subcommittee or not, for this panel. I am not seeing any right now. I would like to add, not so much a question, but really a statement to the department. And I appreciate, like Mr. Wilson said, all the hard work that went into the last, at this point, I've lost track, but I guess it's been since March. We're talking about 9 months or so of really unprecedented work, both in terms of pandemic and the recession that accompanied it. But the fact that additional PINs were authorized last week, 9 months after the recession started, the fact that we have actually been under a hiring freeze for the majority of this year, and the fact that by whose ever direction, Department of Human Services staff were seconded to the Department of Labor to deal with unemployment issues because the state government couldn't get its IT issues straight and its vendor issues straight with unemployment to be able to deal with it. That system was supposed to be automated. It's not yet. And so we've had DHS staff sent over to labor to deal with those issues and been forced to backlog TCA, TDAP, SNAP, and other benefit programs. That's unconscionable. And I am shocked that nobody at the Department of Human Services raised a public concern to say, please don't take our staff, or please give us more staff. It is unconscionable. And I am sorry that, you know, there might have been retaliation from the administration for such a statement, but we have a responsibility. We have a moral obligation. And considering the department has literally spent hundreds of millions of dollars over budget on an IT system, while also crying poverty with regard to staffing, shows us where our priorities are. And I'm glad that MD Think is close to being implemented, and I'm glad that it's almost over, but we are hundreds of millions of dollars over budget on it. And we are yet to see the fruits of that labor for the most part. And yet we couldn't get enough people operating phones. If the goal of these programs is to get people off of the programs and to get them into stable work and stable housing and stable nutrition, then putting them through hoops where they cannot get access to these benefits or have to spend hours on a phone or hours in line or hours getting to the offices to be able to file paperwork is hours they cannot be working, is hours that they cannot sustain jobs. They would literally be fired for trying to get benefits if they manage to get a job. We cannot, these are incompatible goals. And we have to get to a point where people in need are able to access the services they need without having to jump through hundreds of hours of paperwork and hoops. So I'm sorry if I'm on a soapbox right now, but it is heartbreaking to continuously listen to these stories. And I've heard these stories for 13 years. And the number of stories that I've heard have gone up in the last 6 years. We have to fix them. So I'm going to get off my soapbox now and acknowledge Vice Chairman Valentino Smith for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No questions, but can I go on a soapbox now?
Sure, go ahead. I did it.
Thank you, and agree. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your fervent remarks on behalf of this vulnerable population that you and I and the subcommittee oversee these budgets for. I just wanted to try to highlight two things as we're coming to the close of the hearing. One is the chairman and I work with these budgets to oversee the most vulnerable people in our population. And one of the things that we wanted to highlight for today was that we're dealing with temporary cash assistance, TDAP, SNAP, and pandemic EBT. But that right now that everybody understand that the committee is also extremely concerned about the providers that serve our community and the families and the youth. And that was going to be part of this hearing today, but we'll be following up with the Community Association of Resources for Families and Youth because they are some of the same safety net. And we're concerned that the department hasn't had the resources yet to put into the Family First program, which is supposed to be being implemented, and into provider payment reform that's needed for these providers that have additional costs during the pandemic. So for those viewing, we just want you to know we see the holistic position here for the vulnerable. In addition, with respect to what the chairman raised with, it seems that for this very vulnerable population and the basic need of getting food, that we experienced a severe workforce shortage and an immediate deployment of resources necessary. And that in January, we expect to hear about the status of the 60,000 families that dropped off because the department didn't reapply for a waiver. But also the concern that we have about the restaurant meals program not being implemented, and that we would expect a status of that in January also. And that we passed House Bill 1313, which said that it had an implementation date, but it did not prevent the department from taking that policy that was passed by the General Assembly and going ahead and adopting it now and implementing parts of it, because it will provide some relief to those on temporary cash assistance and prevent them from undue and unnecessary sanctions. So I think we would ask for the department to also then be contemplating that request by this very significant community, and that we get an update on the additional vendors that they're getting in to be able to provide the food. So a lot of follow-up for January for these very vulnerable populations. And the specific request is that we're going to have budget problems. We're going to have general fund problems. We've got revenue problems. But this is our responsibility to take all of the federal money. This is all federal money, and make sure that we don't leave any of it on the table, and that we do our part to get this federal money out to the recipients. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right. Any additional questions from anyone? And there is a, hang on. Okay, sounds good. I don't see any additional questions. So with that, I want to thank everyone for testifying, for coming to this hearing. I think it's a critically important issue that we're dealing with. It is by no means the end of the issue that we're dealing with. We are going to continue having these discussions while session starts. We obviously have a budget hearing on this subject that will go forward as well. I will like to point out that for the budget hearing, I would be very interested, in addition to all the other issues raised, getting an update as to where we are with the implementation of the restaurant benefit and where the holdup is, considering it's been a year and a half or so since that legislation went into effect. Maybe a year and a quarter, but it's still been over a year. That would be very helpful to know if you guys can update us on that as well, even in advance of the budget hearing. That would be useful. With no other comments, I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank the members of the public who testified to tell us their stories. And we're hoping that we can get either your specific issues resolved as quickly as possible, and if they have been resolved, then more permanent solutions in place. So thank you all very much, and we'll adjourn the meeting at this time.
Happy holidays to all.